الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد عبده ورسوله. أما بعد، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. My dear brothers and sisters, on this blessed day of this blessed month, we gather here in the tradition of our wonderful faith and its prophet, to gather as a community to reflect on the issues that matter to our lives, to our direct lives. This is not a rote ritual, a mindless exercise, something that we do just because our parents did it, or our teachers do it, or our culture embraces it, but it's a purposeful exercise to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to recharge our spirits with a connection with Him. Everything in Islam, especially when it comes to worship, is purposeful. It has a reason and it has a reward. When you study for an exam, if your mind is somewhere else, if I open up the book of discrete mathematics or whatever subject, anatomy, and I'm reading it, but my mind is somewhere else, on the last episode of whatever cable show I watched the other night, will I benefit from this information come the test? Now, it looks like I'm studying, I'm actually reading, and I actually am reading. But if my mind is not in what I'm doing, if I'm not absorbing the information and thinking about it, I won't be able to use it to my benefit. When we pray, many of us, including myself, sometimes we're mindless. Sometimes our mind goes somewhere else. We're engaging in the movements. We're engaging in the worship. But are we engaging in the worship? Is that the worship? Is it aerobics? Is it a physical exercise? Or is it a spiritual, mental exercise? When we are promised that salah, that it makes us stay away from what is harmful, from what is problematic and defiling. Is it the mere exercises that magically push that away? Or is it a change in the heart and mind that causes us to reflect on these words and these meanings that we're reading and get closer to Allah. Therefore, build a capacity and an immunity against sins that may come our way in the future. When we engage in prayer with our hearts and our minds as much as with our bodies, we are transforming our souls and our characters and our behavior. That is what does it. We read the Quran, we engage in hifz. Many of us have the tradition of pushing our children to memorize the Quran. MashaAllah, that's a wonderful tradition. It's a long-standing tradition. Not just of Muslims, but those who believe in Allah since the first prophets. This notion of dhikr, this notion of memorization, of certain prayers, of certain ways to connect with Allah. As a matter of fact, Adam, the first prophet, was taught words that he can reflect back to his Lord with and to memorize them. But at every moment in time, especially in this tradition of ours, our minds and our hearts must be involved in what we are reading and memorizing in order to transform ourselves. It is not mindless. It is not ritualistic in the sense of doing it in a rote, mechanical, zombie-like way. That will not change anything. I want to talk today about justice, because justice is much the same way. It is not a vacuous exercise. It is not a tokenized system. It has a lot of meaning, it has a lot of purpose, just like prayer, just like fasting, just like Iman itself. Let us go back to that very foundation, Iman. When we talk about Islam, Islam itself has purpose and has meaning. What does Islam mean? We talk about submission to Allah. It's not a mindless submission. It's submission meaning that we recognize and we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. And then that understanding changes the way I think about myself and the world. That when a just God, when a great God, when a great power is in fact in charge of everything big and small, everything that is clear to the world and hidden, I have nothing to fear. I have no one to fear but Allah. No one has any power over me but Allah. That is what this Islam and this Iman actually means. And so even the way the word is chosen in the Arabic language, a very rich and beautiful language, one of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to choose that language is its capacity to hold the meanings, the powerful meanings of this religion. The word Iman is not some proper name that was just chosen. It has meaning. It goes back to the root word amana. So not only when we have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we get a sense of security in our hearts from this, a sense of amn from this Iman, belief in Allah. When we submit our faces and our hearts and our destinies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Islam, we get salam, we get peace from that act, from that exercise, from that relationship. So from the Islam you get a sense of peace in your heart. From the Iman we get a sense of security. If we're missing the sense of peace, which if divinely mandated, no one can disrupt. No warmonger, no dictator, no unjust system, no violator, no scary big army or police force or investigative agency or thief or murderer or sinful evil person. Nothing can change that because we're connected to Allah and only He has power over us. And the same thing with the security, the sense of security you get from Allah. Don't even worry about your future when you believe that Allah is in charge. Let's think back to the first sin, if you will. When Iblis failed to heed the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and was declared someone who is cast outside the mercy of Allah. Do you think, if you want to translate Iman as simply believing in the existence of God, do you think that Iblis does not believe in the existence of God? He does. Obviously. He knows God exists for a fact. In that sense, he's a very strong believer, if you want to define belief as the notion that I think or I believe or I know that God exists. That's not what it means. Not in the Islamic tradition. It goes further. It means to trust in Allah. Now obviously to trust in Allah, you have to believe that Allah exists. So that's part of the definition. But it goes further. It's to trust in the will of Allah over our own. And that is where Iblis failed. He didn't fail in acknowledging the existence of God. He failed in trusting the will of God over his own. And that's where that all sin started. The fountain of sin. And so back to where we start is trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To trust that what He tells us, what He teaches us through His Prophet, through the revealed Word, through the signs of the bigger book all around us, and that's where Muslims are contemplative, pondersome. We contemplate and we think and we ponder because Allah connects with us through the signs of His creation, through the book that was revealed and through the larger signs, both of which are called ayat in terms of their unit. The unit of the Quran is an ayah, and the unit of the signs of God all around us is also an ayah. The same word is used in the Arabic language. That's how we connect to Allah. Justice is a system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He declared it upon Himself. Imagine His creation. And to understand justice in Islam, we have to understand that it has three definitions or three concepts, not one. There are three words that I've been able to identify that, to me, explain justice, the sort of justice we talk about in the English language or in the Western world, but much more deeper than the way we understand it. The first is adl. The second is qist. And the third is mizan, all of which are mentioned in the Holy Quran. And one ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانِ. Now when you think about adl, which is the word that we normally use in the Arabic colloquial language to denote justice, it does have a meaning, and an important meaning to that larger concept of justice. Adl, straightness, and a direction. You can't be straight to the wrong direction. When we pray in the Fatiha, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, we talk about the straight path. Where does it lead to? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is straight by definition because it leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Adl also means that God is the goal, the ghaya, in any justice system. If we are pursuing equality for egotistical purposes, that's not quite adl in the Islamic understanding. If we're pursuing it to gain more power for ourselves, again, Allah is the most powerful and we are weak before Allah. Huwa al-Ghani al-Hamid. We don't get it. That is not the way justice is understood in Islam. At the very beginning and at the very end, any pursuit of justice has God as its ultimate goal. Adl, the direction of justice, leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, if you want to be equal in sin, technically that's equality. But because it doesn't lead to Allah, it is not equality the way Islam thinks of it. It's not the adl the way Islam thinks of it. There is a direct measure and a direct direction and a goal. It is not something that is fluid and up to us to create and decide, and flexible and nuanced and ambiguous. It's very clear. So again, if you have equality in sin, that is not equality, or that is not adl according to Islam. Then there's the concept of qist. Qist is giving everything its due. Now in that sense, justice that we tend to talk about in colloquial language, whether colloquial Arabic or French or Urdu or English, is the justice that is court justice, the legal system. But the justice in Islam, court justice or legal justice, is just one small part of it. Justice in Islam is holistic, comprehensive, and it basically comprises all things. There is such a thing as dhulm al-nafs. Have you heard of the concept of dhulm al-nafs? If justice and dhulm, which means injustice, were a concept of legal court considerations, then what is dhulm al-nafs? What is injustice against the self? No, in Islam, justice is holistic. And when you don't give something its due, you are committing a sense of injustice. You owe something to your body. To your body. Going to a gym for the sake of Allah, meaning for the sake of preserving the gift that Allah has given you, the blessing Allah has given you, which is your health, which is your body, is a form of justice. Have you heard this before? Working out is justice. It is in Islam. When you cater to the needs of your spirit, you have a responsibility upon yourself spiritually, the spirit that you have, to feed it just as you feed that body, to work it out just as you work that body out. That is a form of justice. So worship is a form of justice to the soul, giving it its due, its qist. And when we don't do that, that's zulm al-nafs. A'udhu billahi min zulm al-nafs. The worst form of injustice is that which I do to myself. Is when I deny myself its due rights. And here we're talking about rights. I have a right upon myself to seek paradise. And when I don't pursue that right, when I don't deliver that right, I'm being unjust to myself. No one else is doing it to me. No government, no entity, no external force. It is me doing it to myself. And that is the most pervasive form of injustice in the world, by the way. So we have to be very wary of this. To be just to the soul, to the self, to the body, to the parents. They have a lot of things due to them, right? From us as children, from the offspring. Your children have a right upon you. There's a qist to deliver to them. Your job, your society, your community, the orphans, the needy, the hungry, the vulnerable, those who face injustice, for us to do nusra to them, to vindicate them. All of those are rights upon us. And to give those due rights, to give that qist, proportionality, is a form of justice and part of the justice of Islam. And lastly, the sense of balance. Balance is a very beautiful concept in Islam. Al-mizan. Everything in this world is balanced. The way time passes for us is balanced between night and day. The way our existence is balanced is between the physical and the spiritual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to maintain a balance, which means this, that if something is good, more of it is not better. The right amount is better. For example, is prayer good? Absolutely. But if I pray all day and all night and do nothing else, am I then the best? No. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about two brothers. One who prayed when it was time to pray and gave the extra nawafil, but then worked and contributed and built in this dunya. And the other who was a hermit of sorts, which we don't have that tradition in Islam. The sort that stays in a monastery. You have that in the Catholic tradition, in the Buddhist tradition. We don't have that in the Muslim tradition. And secludes from the world and engages in acts of worship all day and all night. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who balances is the true Muslim, is the better Muslim. So in that sense, we have that concept of balance, even when it comes to good things. So we say, absolutely have a right to physical pleasure, for example. But in the right context, in the right balance. We believe in rest and play at the right moments, and hard work and worship in all of the others. We believe in cohabiting and having a spouse, but that relationship can only be matriculated in the context of what is just, of the qist of it all, of marriage. This is not a religion that says if it's pleasurable, it's haram. Other traditions say that. No, ours says balance it. It's a very open and very a reasonable and rational religion, the more you understand it. And everything is about balance. We balance work with family. We balance making money in order to survive with giving charity for others to be able to survive. No one says give everything away and start begging. But also we don't become miserly and hold on. Because ultimately we believe that justice is Allah's. So Allah can make me impoverished and make the poor rich. But He chose me to be in this position and them to be in that position. Solely as a test for me to behave in a certain way and for them to behave in a certain way. The poor are given instructions about how to interact in society, and the rich, or those who are able, are also given instructions. And I could be at any moment in time. In both ways, I need to understand what are my responsibilities or my dues. If I'm poor, I do not have madalla or maskana to anybody but Allah. I believe that Allah will provide for me. And I do my best to plod on, right? And even from the small that I have, I still give charity. If I'm wealthy, if I've been given that opportunity, I then have the responsibility to give back because it's an amana, it's a trust. It's not really mine. Even life is not really mine. I'm living in borrowed time. I'm here for a small portion of time, much smaller than I think. Allah has allowed me this space, this moment in time, because He is just. Even life is about justice. It could have been that Allah arbitrarily assigned people to hell and heaven. But in His divine justice, He provided us with an opportunity, a waiting room called dunya, in which we step in and get a say in where we end up going. He delegated that. Ultimately, it's Allah's will, but He delegated from His wisdom to us a say on where we ultimately go. That's what dunya is all about. And that's why we're here for the short amount of time. To decide for ourselves where we will go. Praying and supplicating for Allah to guide us there. But ultimately, that is why we're here. And justice is the living way of a Muslim. I will talk a little bit more detail, just very briefly, because we have a little bit more time left, about how we apply that concept in the work that we do on behalf of the Muslim community. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم لعلكم ترحمون. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Since we understand justice to be holistic and comprehensive and a way of life, when I call myself a Muslim civil rights activist and I talk about justice, I don't just think, as I mentioned, about justice that I pursue in the courtrooms on behalf of Muslims who face discrimination. Some of you know CARE, or the Council on American Islamic Relations, is the organization that works to defend the image of Islam in the public sphere and the rights of Muslims in the public sphere. But I don't think of my work as limited to that legal arena when it comes to justice, but rather to the holistic arena. So it's important for me that the rhetoric on Islam and Muslims is just, is balanced, has its proportionality, and is in the right direction. Because if it isn't, if I allow that to go on, more acts of discrimination will happen. So we have a lot of work to do in the media, in addition to the courthouses. Likewise on the streets, likewise in the coalition building, and reaching out to communities and interfacing with them and letting them know the reality of who Muslims are and what Islam is all about. Rather than allowing the well-funded Islamophobic networks to be the ones to poison the air and the water as far as our neighbors and our societies are concerned while we sit it out pursuing our paychecks. Again, balance. You got to work, you got to feed your family, but by God, we have to stand up and defend ourselves and our faith and what is true. I want to give you one small example in the 3 minutes I have left. When the only native Muslim community of Europe, the Bosnians, were subjected to one of the worst bouts of genocide post-World War II, simply and only for declaring La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That was the only reason. For that European Muslim community, the only native one in Europe, to face rape and torture, murder, discrimination of all forms, and genocide, erasure. And then for those who survived, to come to this country yearning for that long elusive freedom of religion, freedom of expression that once cost them their lives in another continent. To come to ours, to our country, the land of the free, the home of the brave, and yet face once again a refusal for them to practice their religion freely. We had a mosque here in Illinois that was supposed to be commissioned to be built. They fulfilled all of the criteria, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, but were denied, the Bosnian community were denied a permit zone for their mosque simply because of their religion. There was no other justification. Well, we were not going to allow this to happen again on our watch. That's why we've built a backbone. That's why we built an institution to defend our brothers and sisters, so that that which started happening in other places won't begin to happen here. We stepped up, alhamdulillah, with the grace of Allah and the support of the community, and took them, those who were abusing their rights, to task. Fast forward 5 years later, a long 5 years of detailed work of I say this in a couple of minutes, but you just imagine the work of an attorney. Some of you here are attorneys. The paperworks that were filed, the emails that were sent, the calls that were made, the depositions, the meetings, the court filings, all of that stuff. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, all pro bono for the Muslim community from CARE Chicago. And as a result of the fight for 5 years in the court system, in the settlement rooms, in the media, because the media matters, that's where we can push our narrative and put pressure on the other side. Alhamdulillah, we were vindicated, and we won them the right to build the masjid and a $500,000, $500,000 in seed money. And this last Friday, a very powerful moment in my career played out. When I walked through those doors into that building and saw a prayer hall as big as this, fully built, 7 classrooms in which their children were studying Islam and the Sunnah and fiqh and other sciences. The grandson of the Imam, the little Bosnian kid, was reciting the Quran, a hafiz. And once again, and more importantly than the building, the community was built. Once again, those who were denied and persecuted for La ilaha illallah had the opportunity to stand tall and say La ilaha illallah. That is what vindication is about. That is what nusra is about. That is what pursuing justice for those who are weak and meek by those who have some ability and some strength and some money is all about. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help guide us in the direction of being strong in the way of justice for all people, for all humans, for all those who are vulnerable. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us have real iman, to have real Islam, to have real concentration and focus in our acts of worship so that we may be transformed. Ya Allah, Allahumma اغفر لنا ذنوبنا, اللهم كن معنا ولا تكن علينا, اللهم وفقنا إلى ما تحبه وترضاه, اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار, اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا واغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات, المؤمنين والمؤمنات, الأحياء منهم والأموات, إنك سميع مجيب الدعوات, وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم, وقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي, يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.